Hello, everyone, and welcome. Good afternoon to you all, and good morning to our friends who are joining from the West Coast. Thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to welcome you all to the fifth installment of Lessons from the Field. My name is Kashana Hill, and I am Executive Director of the Redress Movement. We are going to jump right into today's conversation, but I'll first take just a moment to explain who we are and the work that we are doing at the Redress Movement. As I mentioned, I have the honor of serving as Executive Director of the Redress Movement. We are a new national nonprofit organization, about 2.5 years old, that is working in communities across the country to ensure that there is equitable access to housing opportunity. We are committed to leading a multiracial movement that empowers communities to take direct action to redress racial segregation. We work in partnership with local communities to repair the harms caused by intentional policies that segregate and continue to segregate communities across the country. We do our work by educating, mobilizing, shifting the narrative, and winning redress victories. We are here to identify, promote, right, and win victories that address and remediate residential segregation. Our starting point is housing, but we work in solidarity with those who are facing the facts of history, redressing harms of the past, and healing our nation by dismantling the barriers that divide us. We're so honored to have you all joining us today for the conversation on faith and redress. I am going to briefly introduce today's moderator, and then we will get started. It's my pleasure to introduce Leah Rothstein. Leah is a housing policy expert and organizer with over 20 years of experience. Leah is also the co-author, along with her father, Richard Rothstein, of Just Action: How to Challenge Segregation Enacted Under the Color of Law. Leah, we're so pleased and honored to have you joining us today, and we're looking forward to today's conversation. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Kashana. Good morning and afternoon to everybody. I'm really excited to be moderating this discussion on faith and redress. There's obviously a lot to say about the interaction of faith communities and segregation. And today our conversation will trace both white faith communities' interactions with discriminatory housing systems and practices. We'll also examine the ways communities of faith are engaging with the legacies of discriminatory housing policy, and share how faith leaders are working to benefit their communities through actions that redress the harms of segregation. Now, I'm particularly interested in this because, as Kashana mentioned, I co-wrote Just Action and have been speaking about it around the country, including to many congregations and faith-based groups, trying to inspire people and groups and congregations to get involved in local efforts to redress segregation in their communities. We wrote about several of these faith-based efforts, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about many more examples from around the country from our panel, from our panelists today. So there's obviously a rich history in this country to build on and learn from faith leaders and their congregations in leading the way in the fight for civil rights and racial justice. And we'll get into some of how we're building on that history. There's also a darker history of white congregations and their support for segregation, which we'll also have a chance to get into. And I just want to say I'm here moderating this panel, and I'm excited about it because I believe that there's a huge opportunity to build support for redress through local churches, synagogues, and mosques. So we want to get into some ways today that can be done and be inspired by the examples we'll hear. I also think it's a particularly interesting time to be having this discussion as participation and membership in religious institutions is declining, but there's also an increasing and growing awareness and attention to how those institutions can use the resources that they do have, like underutilized land, for example, to help their communities in ways that can redress the harms of segregation. So with that, we'll get into it. We'll first hear from our three panelists. I'll introduce them, they'll introduce themselves. As we go, put any questions you have in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as possible in the last section of the webinar. So we have three speakers today. I'm really excited to hear from all three of them. They all have extensive experience and background, which I unfortunately don't have time to fully explain. If you'd like their complete bios, let us know. We could get those to you. I'll be giving little truncated versions of those. So our first speaker is Greg Jarrell, Redress's senior campaign organizer in Charlotte and the author of Our Trespasses, White Churches and the Taking of American Neighborhoods. Greg is based in West Charlotte's Enderley Park neighborhood, where he has lived and worked on equitable housing issues since 2005. He is one of the co-founders of QC Family Tree, a cultural organizing group in his neighborhood, and a founding organizer of Charlotte's West Side Community Land Trust. He has been co-chair of Charlotte Clergy Coalition for Justice, on the leadership team of Charlotte's Community Benefits Coalition, and continues to agitate and organize for housing justice in Charlotte. His recent book, Our Trespasses, White Churches and the Taking of American Neighborhoods, examines the influences of white churches in planning, executing, and profiting from the federal urban renewal projects of the 50s and 60s in Charlotte and beyond. So Greg, would you please take a few minutes to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work?
Sure. Thanks, Leah. Everyone, Greg Jarrell. And now I've been working with the Redress movement for about 4 or 5 months as the campaign organizer here in Charlotte. Prior to that, 20 years on the ground here in the Enderley Park neighborhood in West Charlotte, in an area that a former neighbor here called the catchment basin of urban renewal. So have worked alongside and lived alongside neighbors here struggling for equitable housing and for all manner of other kinds of justice struggles here. So my background is as a theologian and a pastor, and have worked in that context for a long time prior to starting as an organizer with Redress movement, but also as a writer and researcher, really focused on the intersection of faith and housing, and in particular over the past 7 or 8 years working on this project on churches and urban renewal.
Great, thank you so much, Greg. Our next panelist is Reverend Monique French. She's the lead pastor and director of the Washington Heights United Methodist Church and Community in Battle Creek, Michigan, and serves as the Calhoun County Commissioner for her district there. A Flint, Michigan native, Dr. French has a rich background in social services that spans over 15 years. She has been licensed to preach since 2004 and has since served in various ministerial and leadership capacities in Michigan, affecting change through her involvement with educational and support programs. In her current role, she has made the Washington Heights United Methodist Church and Community, known as the Hub of Hope, helping other people excel, a cornerstone for life essentials, living conditions improvement, and holistic community development. And I met Monique when I was speaking about Just Action in Battle Creek. It was hosted in her church hall, and I was so impressed by all the work she's doing in Battle Creek. So happy to have her on the panel today. Monique, would you like to introduce yourself for a moment?
Hello, as Leah stated, my name is Monique French. I'm the pastor and director at Washington Heights United Methodist Church. I am humbled to be on this panel with such esteemed guests. And I am a Calhoun County Commissioner for District 2. I also serve as a Neighborhood Planning Council Chair for NPC 2. So I moved to Battle Creek about 4 years ago, and had the opportunity to just build relationships and to get to know the aesthetics of the community. And so been really engaged and invested into the community. It's been an honor to work alongside of the people in this community, and I'm just looking forward to this panel.
Great, thank you so much. And I see the models of the houses behind you that you're building, so hopefully we can get into that soon. Our next panelist is Dr. Kevin Slayton, senior pastor at the new Waverly United Methodist Church in Baltimore, Maryland. After several years serving in the nonprofit sector and legislative arena, working to address the needs of individuals living on the margins of society, Kevin accepted his calling to preach the gospel. For the past 16 years, he has combined his passion for public policy and prophetic preaching to impact the lives of many. Whether it was as public policy director for the Public Justice Center, program officer with Associated Black Charities, executive director for the Baltimore City General Assembly delegation, or as lead consultant with his own firm, the Slayton Group, Kevin has never wavered in his commitment to the pursuit of justice and equality. Today, he continues to work on public policy issues through his work with the Maryland Center on Economic Policy, and he continues to influence the minds of tomorrow's theologians, I think I said that right, as an adjunct professor with Lancaster Theological Seminary in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Kevin.
Leah, thank you. Thank you so much. Glad to be with you all on today. Shout out to my buddy John Comer, who made the connection. Of course, I pastor in Baltimore City. I live in Baltimore City. And a great deal of my work lately is with the Maryland Center on Economic Policy, recognizing that a great deal of the social justice work that we want to do to truly impact folks who are on the margins has everything to do with how we spend our money. Whether it's historically or even current injustices, both in public policy and in society more broadly. They have vast disparities as it relates to income across race and ethnicity, particularly in Maryland. And so we like to highlight the fact that the state's tax system is a little bit unbalanced. It's unfair, and it's layered with inequities. And so a lot of our work is sort of directed towards the fiscal tax policy anchored in social justice there. Working with community as a pastor, I'm convinced and convicted that the greatest ministry I have is to sort of be the voice for those who don't feel empowered to sort of speak justice. And so that's my ultimate role. And hopefully that's what I can do here, so sort of shed light, speak truth to power, say those things that might jeopardize other folks if they were to say them publicly. So look forward to our conversation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. So now I'm going to ask the panelists a few questions. And please, again, if you have any questions for them, leave them in the Q&A box or the chat, I suppose. Let's start with Greg. So Greg, your research has focused on the federal urban renewal program of the mid-20th century and the role that white churches and their members played in urban renewal. What were some of your key observations from that research that you can share?
Yeah, what became obvious to me is I spent a number of years working in archival collections, doing lots of interviews, was that there was a real confluence of political and religious or theological thinking that was happening inside redevelopment commissions here locally in Charlotte, but further around the country. You can hear that confluence even in the name of the federal program, urban renewal. Renewal sort of, unless you're a magazine salesman, that word doesn't get used a lot, except that you're relatively likely to hear it in churches. It goes along with words like resurrection or being born again, regeneration, those sorts of theological kind of talk. And so I began focusing really on one specific spot on our Charlotte map here, where in a former all-Black neighborhood called Brooklyn, now sits on one side of Brevard Street, or Davidson Street rather, First Baptist Church, all white Southern Baptist congregation, and right across the street from it, the city and county government center. So a really helpful way of both demonstrating and symbolizing the fusion of theological and political power that has made this country what it is, and has been played out in different ways across that time. So in the course of that fusion coming to be there in that former Brooklyn neighborhood, the city took all of that land from a Black community, as happened in 1,200 municipalities during the urban renewal programs that lasted from 1949 to 1974. They rigged the auction that they created so that First Baptist Church would win that auction as part of kind of the response to the way that urban renewal was failing here in Charlotte as it was happening. That church became kind of held up as one of the kind of landmark congregations within the Southern Baptist Convention. And a couple of years later, the convention published in their most widespread magazine an article that highlighted the work that First Baptist Church had done. And the title of that article was "Churches Can Profit from Urban Renewal." And this sort of project had some parallels in other places with religious institutions. A church in San Francisco, a Lutheran church, that had sort of some similar things happening. Baylor University in Waco, Texas, a Baptist university that very much abused the urban renewal program in order to displace an entire neighborhood. And so there were all these kinds of parallels around the country in the way that politics and religion fused. So there's a historian that was influential to me named Jesse Curtis, who's at Valparaiso University in Indiana, who says that Americans read Monday morning's paper with the Sunday sermon ringing in their ears. And when they picked up their Bibles, they did not put down their political commitments. So what's been interesting to me to track is the way that those political and religious commitments got fused together. And they didn't get fused by political or partisan kind of lines. It wasn't like Democrats, white Democrats on one side and white Republicans on another. Really, it was race that was most predictive. It was both white conservatives and white liberals who were pushing for these programs locally and using religious narratives to justify both their conquest, is how they often framed it, of certain places, and the displacement of Black communities, including Black churches, from other neighborhoods.
Wow, yeah, that's not a history, that particular piece of urban renewal that we hear a lot about. So I'm curious how you see like growing the knowledge of that history and the historical research that you've done. How can that influence the work that religious institutions and groups and congregations can do today to repair those harms?
Yeah. So I'm a big believer that simply reckoning with our stories like this one is a really important step along the way towards creating cultures of repair. Um, and so part of that is simply breaking the silence around this history. I mean, you can see the parallels from the doctrine of discovery in the mid 1400s all the way through today. So this is not new necessarily, but people continued somehow to forget it. So at First Baptist Church, this church that I was working in, they built their new sanctuary, sort of completed a 15-year project from beginning to end in their movement into the old Brooklyn neighborhood. In 1972, they completed that. In 1982, they wrote a history book of their congregation on its 150th anniversary, and they included basically zero information about that 15-year-long process that they had only recently completed. So they created this culture of silence around the neighborhood that they had helped to displace, which they never named in any of their documentation. They never called it by its name. They only called it the urban redevelopment area. So they engaged in really this culture of silence built around the place that they were inhabiting. So for me, the first step is that folks have to be willing to begin digging up their stories, the ways that silences have pervaded practice inside our sanctuaries and inside our Sunday school classrooms, the ways that silences continue to maintain a hold on us, and threaten to keep us kind of grounded in this one particular trajectory. I think beyond the silence, there are kind of two parallel streams for us to move in. One simply is accounting for the material harm and doing making some of the material repairs. So the documentation is all out there. In the case of this one congregation that I've most closely studied, they won a rigged auction, and at this point they've got about $90 million in equity just in land, without considering their buildings. And most of that land now is used as parking lot, as just surface level parking lot. And if they've gained that much, then that means that the Black community who was there previously has experienced that much cost. It's cost them that much. And so I think beginning to reckon with that, if we've got all this land, then we need to risk it. We need to be willing to put it on the line to create some new alternatives in our cities, especially in prominent, deeply symbolically important places like in former urban renewal area. But it's also important that we develop cultures of repair and deal with the cultures that allow these kinds of actions to go on. So the way that I've tried to exemplify this in churches, we sing and we tell stories. That's how we communicate culture. And both the storytelling or the sermonizing that was happening as First Baptist Church was making this set of decisions, and the songs that they were singing were pointed towards this narrative of conquest, of taking over a space that God was giving them as though they were powerless. And that's kind of how their narrative around it went. There was one particular hymn that was important to them as they moved along, and the first verse of the hymn says, "Lead on, O King eternal, the day of March has come. Henceforth in fields of conquest, your tents will be our home." And so when I found this in the archives, it was important to me as a Southern Baptist kid, no longer affiliated, but an exemplary Southern Baptist kid in my youth, that I knew that hymn. This is still the water that we swim in. And that hymn is in the brand new Presbyterian hymnal that is a very, very woke hymnal. But that hymn is still in there in the new PCUSA, the Progressive White Presbyterian hymnal. And so to deal with those cultural resources that we have that continue to get passed along is another piece of the work that our folks have to do.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm going to move on to Monique. I'd love to hear about sort of staying in the historical context a bit, what the historical context in your neighborhood of discriminatory housing policies and how it specifically impacted the Washington Heights neighborhood and what unique challenges your neighbors and your neighborhood is facing as a result of that history.
So, Leah, one of the things that I had an opportunity to do when I got here was to actually learn about the history and the culture of Battle Creek, Michigan. And so one of the things that I learned that kind of encouraged us to even get into the housing area is that we learned about it was a place called the Bottoms, and the Bottoms was flooded out. And what they did, they steered people to the Washington Heights area. This was a predominantly affluent community, and by them steering at what used to be single family homes now became multiple families dwellings. And so and looking at that and then just discovering that how the redlining has left an impact on this neighborhood because of the systemic inequalities that had persisted over the generations, people were not able to get loans. And so this was a very disinvested community. The historical practices, assessing mortgage, lending risk that led to the exclusionary of the predominantly minority areas was denying people access to the vital resources that were needed for this community. People were not able to get loans or insurance. There was a lot of disinvestment into this particular area, so it stunted the economic growth and access to essential services. It's created like a whole lot of blight and poverty that families still face today. The effects of discriminatory housing practices have manifested in various areas, including the housing crisis. This was an area that the housing stock was very old. The housing stock was very old. It left an impact on the economic opportunities, the education system, healthcare. A lot of times residents were not able to access some of the vital resources that were needed. So residents like Washington Heights and other areas in the Battle Creek area, they struggle with the repercussions of these practices resulting in dilapidated housing, underfunded schools, health disparities. The system neglected not only erode the quality of life for individuals, but it undermined the community's potential for social cohesion and collective advocacy. It was hard for people to even be able to come together to advocate on their own behalf. So we had opportunity to recognize the history, and it allowed us to understand the present challenges that people were facing. So some of the things that we did, we really built relationships with people in the community because we didn't want to do anything to the community. We wanted to work with the community. So we heard the voice of the people in the community and some of the things that they faced and some of the challenges that they had. So that kind of spearheaded us with this project, which we call the Recover Our Neighborhood Project. And what that is, it's a lot of different components. It's a lot of different components addressing the systemic issue at a holistic approach. So one of the key components that we do, we provide, we call it the Table of Hope. We provide meals to address the food insecurities that people face in this neighborhood, because we want to empower them and we want to just remove the stigma that is attached from the food insecurity. So we want to empower them, and they don't have to come in and prove that they are in need of the meal, but they are able to partake in the meal. And it's across socioeconomic statuses. So it doesn't matter whether you are a affluent person or you're a person from the street. People break bread at the table together. And so it allows us to build social cohesion and to build up relationship. We had something what we call the Day of Hope. That's when we brought the community together. We worked with cross-denominational lines. We worked with about 7 other churches to bring a community carnival to this area, because we wanted to provide people with a day of hope because of a lot of the oppression that people face. We also are able to provide housing repairs to existing housing stock that is here. And so we're able to assist people. We receive funding from MISTA so we can bring houses up to code or energy efficient code. And also we are looking at developing or building 17 new houses. We've purchased a block of land where houses used to exist and they've been torn down. So we're looking at launching and stimulating the economy that way. We also, we just do a lot in the community from a holistic perspective. But we know and we understand that we don't want to do it to the community. We want to work with the community for revitalization. Because if we look at it from a holistic perspective, and build in partnerships to where we're able to provide the services, it empowers the community to advocate for themselves and to make realistic change.
Yeah, that's great. You are doing so much. So I'd love it if you could tell us a little more about how you got input from the community. I believe it was listening sessions or surveys or interviews, and then how that led you to the revitalization work you've done on the land around your church buildings.
So we did have a lot of community conversations where we invited the community to come in so that they can share their views, their concerns, hear what some of the other organizations are doing. So we just invite people into this space, and they're able to share their views, their ideas. We also created a community needs assessment where we collected data from the community, some of the things that they would like to see, some of the issues that they are facing, some of the challenges or the barriers that are created that they are facing. We wanted to know how could we be of assistance to eliminate some of those barriers. So we listened to the voice and the heart of the community. So one of the things that we wanted to do was to bring back hope to a community that was hope fatigued. So we listened to their voice. So some of the things that we were very instrumental about doing is the land that the church currently sits on, which is about a block space. We were very intentional about creating a beautiful space, and it's open to the community that they are able to come and enjoy. So we have a playground area that is located. It's called Greenwood Park, which we rent to the city of Battle Creek. And so we raised funds, we upgraded the slides for that particular park because we wanted our children to have a safe place to play. We topped the basketball courts where the children would play, and we bought the basketball hoops into regulatory levels. So we redid that. We added an outdoor fitness center because we believe in people being healthy and having a safe place where they can come and work out. And then we added an outdoor walking track on the place where the church actually sits. And so we open our community room up to agencies and organizations in the community so that they're able to come provide resources. We host a lot of different community events. As I stated, we had that what we call the Day of Hope. We had that community carnival, and we had created a needs assessment. So we gathered a lot of data from that particular carnival where people didn't feel like pressure, but they were able to answer a quick community needs assessment, and they provided us some feedback. So the outdoor walking track that we added on this property, that was a result of one of the listening sessions that we had that, was a suggestion that they would like to see a safe place where they can actually walk. So we added the outdoor walking track to this location. We also provide the financial literacy piece where we partner with some of the financial institutions that they're able to come in and provide and empower the community to make wise choices. And we're partnering with Neighborhoods Inc. so that they can provide the home readiness course so that people can be empowered not only to obtain a home, but to keep the house so that they'll be ready to make those decisions that are needed. We do summer youth career exploration program where we take the youth to different locations so they can start thinking about their future and making those wise decisions about career choices.
Yeah, wow. Such a holistic view of how to address all of the legacies of discrimination and segregation in that community. It's just inspiring. So I'd love it if we could take sort of a broader view for a second. And if you could share your thoughts on how faith leaders like yourself could mobilize their congregations as you have and their broader community to engage in these kinds of conversations and actions that can rectify the unjust impacts of segregation while also fostering, healing and unity in the community.
So what I could do is share what I did coming here to the city of Battle Creek. So the first thing I had an opportunity to do was to have conversation with the congregation to see the direction or to understand where the congregation wanted to go. What is it that they want to do? Because this particular congregation had experienced a lot of hurt and trauma in the past. So we had an opportunity to hear their voice. And so through prayer, we launched a vision. So our vision and our mission is actually rooted in Acts 1:8, where it says that I will empower you to be my witnesses in Judea, Jerusalem, Samaria, and the uttermost parts. So we took that particular passage of scripture and we broke it up into the 4 categories where we specifically focus on internal ministries, and then we looked at a 3 to 5 mile radius around this particular location, and then the partnerships that we developed throughout the city of Battle Creek. And this empowers people so that they don't just have to stay here, but they can be launched abroad. So that's kind of what we did to start. And then after we launched the vision, we started building relationships with some of the community partners because we heard the heart of the people and some of the needs that this particular community had. So when I actually came here to the city of Battle Creek, it was in the thick of the pandemic. This is when everything had shut down. So that's when I moved here. So one of the things that we did realize is that people were facing food insecurity. So we have partnered with one of the local nonprofit organizations called Rise, and they were able to provide food boxes to people who were in need of food during that time. We also partnered with the county health department because we wanted to get people those emergency protection supplies that were needed, the hand sanitizers, the mask, and all those things. And we also wanted to empower people to make decisions for themselves. So we provided them with information that they can make a decision whether or not they wanted the vaccination. So, you know, just to dispel some of the myths. So what we saw is that just from that began to work because it allowed us to build relationships with people in the community in this particular community. And then they saw this place as a place of hope, a place where they can come. They felt comfortable with accessing resources or information, building relationships. And they know that this was a place of, I guess, a place of integrity, not I guess, it was a place of integrity. Because we had to do things in a way to where we built trust, repaired relationships within the congregation that were broken, and they had to see that that I was a person that they can actually relate to and trust, and then build relationships with the community. They also saw that this was a place that they are welcome and that really care about the people in this community. And so from that, really being involved in the community. So that's how I got involved with the Neighborhood Planning Council, where it bring people throughout the community together. Also was encouraged to run for county commissioner, and actually ran for county commissioner and was unopposed. So just being involved in the heartbeat and the life of the community and allowing the people to know that I am an advocate for the people in the community and that I'm a person that really care about the people in the community. So I think building those relationships has helped us to launch the efforts that we're launching. Now, I do want to say that it's not all roses because if you haven't noticed, I am a Black woman in a position of leadership, and being a Black woman in a position of leadership, a lot of times I face a lot of challenges that other leaders or male leaders do not have to face. And yeah, I face a lot of those challenges, and it's not always easy. But because of the passion that I have for the people in the community, I endure those things, and it's motivation when someone tells you that the difference that you're making in their community.
Yeah, thank you so much. I am just continuously inspired to hear you talk about everything you're doing. And I'm sure folks on this webinar are as well. So if you have questions, please continue to put them in the Q&A box and we will get to them shortly. So thank you so much, Monique. I'm going to move on to Kevin. A few questions for you. First, can you share with us why it is that you believe faith leaders are uniquely positioned to do the work of redressing residential segregation? And what is the unique perspective that faith leaders can bring to this work of redress?
This past summer, my congregation, which is predominantly African American, middle class African American, we shared in a summer reading with a congregation across town, which is predominantly white and affluent, in the reading of Heather McGee's book, The Sum of Us. And one of the ideas she lifts in this book is this issue of the solidarity dividend, which basically suggests that we don't have to be fearful that in order for some other community to benefit, it has to be at the loss of another. That we're all a part of this together. faith leaders are uniquely positioned to sort of speak that message. The concern I have with this is David Foster Wallace, the late novelist, in his commencement speech at Kenyon College in 2005 or 6. He tells the story, Greg, of two adolescent fish that are swimming, right? And they encounter a much older and wiser fish. And as they approach one another, the older fish says to the two younger fish, "How's the water?" And they both move on and go their separate way. And one of the younger fish looks at the other and says, "What in the hell is water?" Faith leaders have a huge responsibility not to show up every week and act like what's happening out in the public space is something new to them. I think that's what Dr. King was talking about in his letter from the Birmingham jail. It's how are we reading this same book, coming out so different on it? How is it that we're talking about discrimination as if it's something new? How are we talking about the George Floyds of our day and the injustice around policing are new, particularly when it comes to housing? On that issue, most churches tend to reside in communities that look like them. They have a unique responsibility to talk about that. I share the story. I think I was 8, 1978. My church burned down in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And we moved literally, we marched across the tracks. I remember it as a child, led by our late pastor, Reverend Melvin Jordan. And once we arrived at the church, which was once owned by a predominantly white congregation, we go in, we celebrate. When we emerge, maybe an hour or so later, all of the cars had been covered in feces and urine, sending the message to us that you are not welcome here. The late Benjamin May says that 11 o'clock on Sunday is the most segregated hour in the United States of America. And I think the reason it remains there, to get to your question, why they're uniquely positioned, is because that's the opportunity to talk about and address the issues of discrimination, of inequity that are harming our community. But if many of our faith leaders continue to act like adolescent fish and act as if they don't know the waters that they're swimming in and it's all around them, here's the danger, Leah. It gives permission to those parishioners and those folks who are looking to their moral voices. If they're not saying anything, if they're being complicit, then it's okay for me to do the same thing.
Yeah, I love that. And I wonder if we could expand on that a bit, on what you see the role of faith leaders beyond sort of helping their congregations wake up to the water that we're all swimming in. Is there a role for them to then translate that into action outside of the church walls or outside of the Sunday sermons, and how that might work?
There most definitely is. It just requires the commitment to being uncomfortable. And so I would capture it in the words of Walter Brueggemann, who talks about prophetic imagination. Faith leaders have to be prophetic in their witness, meaning that this is a term we use a lot after the pandemic and 9/11. If you see something, say something. What we've learned and what we've seen is, in most instances, faith leaders, which is an indictment on those in my vocation, they see something, but they're not willing to say something for their fear of having to suffer something. Mm-hmm. And it's the exact opposite. You're supposed to enter the saying of what you see in preparation to suffer. And too many faith leaders for too long have been unwilling to suffer something, to lose members, to lose folks who are going to give money, to sort of lose their own, relationships with folks in the community. But there is this prophetic mantle on those who are called to speak truth to power. There was I'm not going to be overly political here, but there was a Pew study done just after the 2016 election. And it was very fascinating to me because the question it asked was of different demographics, majority white congregations, during this election season, did your pulpit mention the election at all? And it was somewhere like 94% of white congregants who were asked this said during that entire time, it was never mentioned from their pulpit. In the reverse, for African Americans, it was somewhere around 86, 87% that it was mentioned. And to get to the real root of it, it's one thing for the oppressed community to be talking about it, but it has very little impact if those who are in the position to be the oppressor never open their mouths and say anything. It just does far more damage, and all of the permission they need is literally tied up in the story of this Jesus we talk about.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to then follow up on that with Greg. If you have any additional thoughts for particularly working in white congregations to sort of bridge that divide from, preaching about and understanding the history of the congregations, maybe complicity with segregation, to translating that beyond our sort of own understanding of ourselves and our congregation into action that affects change in our community.
Yeah, so I think I appreciate Kevin bringing up Brueggemann's kind of key phrase and that key text of his called prophetic imagination. I think that the key one key for white faith leaders in particular is just in breaking the silences that we've enforced for so long, we open up like some danger, some risk that we'll have to take, but also the opportunity for new imagination. I think most of us probably look around at our society and in our culture dissatisfied, though not always for the same reasons. But I do think that like this opportunity to change our imaginations is really the beginning point of creating something different. And as you mentioned in the kind of the intro, Leah, so many of our congregations now, particularly Christian congregations, are dying. Some of them slowly and some of them at this point rather quickly. And some of their existential questions and their ability to continue to exist have to do with land and space and buildings, where there were a lot more in demand in the 1950s and 60s. And now that we've got empty space and we have empty parking lots that don't get used except for one day a week. So there are all these kinds of opportunities. So it's a magnificent moment that we're in to re-incite people's imaginations about being able to build different kinds of cities and different kinds of neighborhoods with our churches learning new roles now.
Yeah, I love that. And, I'm based in California. In California, we had a law passed a year or so ago called we call it Yes in God's Backyard, that allowed churches land to be rezoned for multifamily if they built a certain percentage of affordable units on that land. Yeah. So I see sort of the coming at it from both ends, sort of the internal work within those congregations to rethink how they're using their land, as well as the policy changes that we can advocate for that make it easier and more feasible for them to do so. So I appreciate that, bringing that into this conversation. I'm going to move over to some of the questions we've had from our audience. The first one is for any of the panelists. How do you see the pastoral itineration system as used in the United Methodist Church contributing to segregation, especially given the direct connection in most congregations to the housing provided for the pastor? Do you have any thoughts about the past and present impacts of the pastoral itineration system? And if anyone wants to answer that and can start with explaining what that term means for the rest of us, that would be great. Anyone want to take that one? Start.
I would defer to my sister. How long have you been Methodist? I'm ordained Baptist United Church of Christ. I pastor a Methodist church, but I'm also ICCC. Itinerancy just means that the pastor, he or she, can be moved at different times, different seasons. They're not permanent at one location. A lot of the churches, just based on the factors that Greg points out around declining numbers within organized Christian religion, not many churches have parsonages anymore anyways. One of the interesting things is that a number of folks in United Methodism will be placed at churches that are in rural areas, which I find very fascinating. I'm not studying it. I'm sure someone will, but it's very unique in the sense as they have dealt with different issues that are in the social space around LGBTQIA rights and what have you. This issue around assigning, it seems in my area, predominantly African-American women to these very rural areas, where ain't no way in hell they moving their family out in these communities to pastor. They're probably struggling just to be Christ-like when they show up out there. But that's a whole other conversation that the denomination needs to have within itself. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else have anything to add on that one?
Yes. So I've been serving in the United Methodist Church, I think about 12 years now. I started out pastoring at an African-American congregation. Then I was moved to a predominantly, well, it was an all-white congregation. They moved me to a different city, to an all-white congregation. I was the first Black female. I was the first Black pastor, female pastor that this particular congregation actually had. And moving there, some of the experiences were quite interesting, to say the least. I'm trying to put this very nicely. It was very interesting, and after a while, they accepted me, but they didn't want to accept other people that look like me. The narrative of the community, or the aesthetics of the community, was actually changing. And so as we were bringing people in from the community because they were starting to look more like me, the affluent, most of the affluent white people that were in that church actually left the church. They would rather see the doors closed than to see more people that look like me to come in and worship at that particular location. Which was very interesting. Now, it wasn't the entire congregation, but a lot of them that were in that congregation. And so from there, they sent me to, as my brother Kevin has stated, 25 miles west of Saginaw to a place called Breckenridge, and I pastored that church, and I was also the first Black pastor that this particular congregation had. It was interesting. I did not move to the area because I was the only pepper in the place. So I did not move to the area, but I served with that congregation for about 6 months before coming to my current location, which is predominantly an African-American congregation, which the experience that I had at Breckenridge, which was a rural place, I didn't have any bad experiences, but I was only there for about 6 months. And then some of the members that embraced me when I was at the church previous to going to Breckenridge, they followed me out to Breckenridge. So that was interesting. So that provided some of the support. And then when they moved me to my current location, which is like 2 hours away from where I was, some of those same people followed me here for my first service because they wanted to show the congregation that they supported the pastor that they used to have. So it was interesting. But as far as with the itinerary system, I think that has, in my view, I believe that has hurt a lot of the congregations, because once they start getting to a place where they can trust and build up relationships, then that particular pastor is moved. And so, yeah, I think that it hurts congregations because they don't have an opportunity to actually have that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems particularly challenging, especially with the subjects we're talking about, which are long conversations and and long sort of learning curves for some folks. So being sort of dropped in and out so quickly is a challenge, I imagine. So our next question is for you, Monique. Can you share some specifics about your community needs assessment process? Specifically, what kinds of questions did you focus on asking? And do you believe that the needs assessments can and should be part of how faith leaders engage their congregations and communities?
So we've been doing community needs assessments. So we have different ones, and it depends on the particular setting in which we're doing. Sometimes we develop community needs assessments around education, and sometimes it's around how do people feel in the community, what could they contribute, or some of the questions that we've asked is how safe do you feel in the community, or what are some of the things that you like to see in the community? How do you envision this community? Because we know that community revitalization efforts take a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of input from the community. But one of the things that I have learned is that once the community started seeing movement, they started buying into the vision. So to the person that actually asked that question, I think that you should develop your community needs assessment specific to the location where you are. What worked here may not work. The same questions that worked here may not work for your particular setting. So I think it's just sitting down, getting a feel or understanding the culture of your particular community and seeing what are some of the things that are important to that particular community.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I also appreciate sort of responding even just a little bit to those needs helps to build trust and can continue to, much like organizing, smaller wins can help us build those bigger ones. So our next question for all of you, or any of you, what are some best practices or suggestions that might help in attempting to get faith leaders and their communities involved in the fight for redress? This is more, it seems like, coming from the organizing, those advocating policy change and working in the communities. How can they engage faith communities to get involved in those efforts?
I think because relationship is so important, that it begins with creating authentic relationships that don't have any expectations initially, and becoming organically a sure, steady presence and trusted presence in that community. And that takes time to build that. But once it's established, you become the go-to. And in those moments, in those arenas, in those areas where your advocacy is not as strong, it creates the perfect environment to educate not only the leadership, but the congregation and the community at large on those issues. So the key is sort of building relationship to create the space to educate.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I would also add in that even the term redress is not unlike the words that we use in Christian tradition that we learn from Jewish tradition of like repentance and and penance, even sort of actions towards fixing what's broken. So you would think that Christian congregations in particular might be kind of uniquely open to the message that things ain't right. But that's not always how it works out. Sometimes we're more defenders of the status quo, especially in white dominant settings, than we are. But then we're ready to fix it. But I do think that that overlap in language kind of offers us a place of kind of, you know, putting our narrative there to say, hey, we haven't gotten it right. And when you don't get it right, then you got to work on fixing that. That's a relatively simple but theologically astute way of getting at the problem. And of course, we recognize that we can't do that on our own. We have to organize together. We have to work with other folks to make those sorts of repairs or penance happen.
Yeah, I love that. We in the Jewish tradition, we talk a lot about atonement. This fits very well, very nicely into that. Sort of using what the direction we're already facing. So backing up and expanding our view a bit, what is the process of educating, if necessary, a congregation about an issue like segregation in their community and moving to act on addressing the issue? How does that look? We've touched on it a bit, but I wonder if there's more to say. We heard from Pastor French that her particular process started with a community needs assessment. And then we just heard from Greg about sort of using the language of the denomination and of the tradition to encompass the actions towards redress. And wondering if there's additional steps or additional ideas that you can share for how to sort of make that jump from education to action.
I would argue at the congregational local level, at an individual, if you were to approach it from a denominational perspective, you could go to the sort of head of that jurisdiction or that area and engage them in a way that it sort of trickles down from them into those denominations. But the individual congregation, I think that work happens at the front door, so to speak, with the pastor, and allowing that relationship to feed into someone who's ultimately going to take the ball and run with it for you, because the pastor, he or she, is not going to probably. But they're going to have to sort of be the one to open the door and say, you can come in and work this way. And just really sort of defining not even so much the benefit of the advocacy or the work, but defining what's in it for the church. Churches, believe it or not, are in the work of making themselves seem relevant as well. And so it's maybe hard to hear, but a lot of faith institutions don't do good just because it's good to do it. They do it because it's good to be seen doing it. And so how do you allow them to do those good things and be recognized for their good ways? So if you can figure those things out, which often isn't hard, it really isn't, but if you can manipulate those things, you can make it happen.
That's great. I really appreciate that addition. Being seen as doing good is also important. Anyone else have any other additional ideas or steps that congregations can take?
It won't surprise you just based on my work. I think that your congregation's archives often have stories, especially in older congregations. Stories, documents, records, both good and bad, or both suggestive of repair and suggestive of the harms that have been caused, that folks can reckon with, so that we're telling a better story. And I think that our particular stories often suggest particular lines of repair that make sense in a trajectory, right? So with the congregations that I've studied, I think that their histories suggest here's a next step that is coherent with our organizations, with our congregation's history in the long term. And so teaching those stories and finding the hidden heroes whose stories haven't been told, That's a really important way of getting congregations into this kind of work.
Yes. Yeah. So did you have anything to add, Monique? Should I move on?
Yeah, what we did, as Greg was stating, finding those hidden heroes, we did celebrate the past. We looked at where we currently are and we envisioned the future. So I just wanted to add that to what has already been said. I think that it's important to have a vision of how you'd like to see the end. And then you can do a work across organizations, partnering, having those authentic relationships with other organizations, other faith organizations, social service organizations, just having a vision for an end.
Yeah, that's great. So to address the most segregated time in America, should churches focus on creating multiracial congregations or embrace experiences like Kevin has been describing with book study or studying their own history? And I will add another option in there, which is something we wrote about in Just Action, and I continue to talk about around the country, which is congregations, same race congregations in segregated communities coming together to build relationships across races and the roles that churches can play in sort of starting those cross-race conversations and building relationships. So yeah, what do you think the focus should be for faith leaders? Is it internal multiracial diversity within the congregation, building multiracial relationships across congregations, or kind of studying your own history internally? Or all of
Now, since I raised the question, I would say, and hope you hear me as I say this, it would sort of be two-pronged. As integration was having its greatest effect in the United States, one of the last bastions of places to integrate was, and I'm going to use this term, the Black church. And the reason it was and still remains that way to a great extent today is because it was in that sanctuary, in that place, that Black folk had somebodyness. On the job, I was boy, girl, N-word, or whatever. But in this place, I had a title. I was the chair of the deacon board. I was the president of the choir. I was this. So they never really gave that up and sort of held tight to it. And so as it relates to this multi-ethnic congregation, I've heard it defined in two ways. Primarily that there is no such thing. So deal with that in the sense that they suggest you either have, because that time of gathering in the sanctuary is about worship, you have, Europeans, majority in the pews, experiencing a Afrocentric worship experience, or you have a predominantly African American or Black congregation experiencing a European worship experience. That experience sort of what determines what that coming together looks like. The reason I say it's two-pronged because the engagement of the community outside of those whom you worship with, I think if we're talking biblically in many ways, should not happen in the sanctuary. It should happen beyond the walls. So I think it definitely should not permit folks from engaging other folks. If you have the same, I'm a Jets fan. I live in Baltimore, which is a sin. But if I find a place where there are other like-minded Jets fans, no matter where we're from, when we get together, for that time, we go back to our separate places, but at that time we get together and we root for this. We have the same goal in mind. I think that is possible within the faith traditions, that you don't necessarily have to overlap or rearrange how it is you come together multiculturally in worship to have a positive impact in the community beyond the walls.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. Greg, Monique? No. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think that part of what Kevin is saying and is simply that inside our congregations, whether they're white dominant or multi-ethnic or majority black, like race is going to be operating.
Mhm.
And
Full
it,
swing.
right. So you just can't, you have to stop pretending that it's not operating, which is often what people in leadership in multi-ethnic congregations are quite susceptible to, especially when it's white leadership in multiracial congregations. And so for just to recognize, hey, this is a thing that we're going to have to be working on until we can dismantle it all the way. Like, to me, that's what we got to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really, as I said, we wrote in Just Action about churches of the same denomination and segregated communities that started biracial sort of interracial dialogue groups. And I've visited many of those around the country that have started, recently or have been ongoing. And it is happening. The congregations may be sort of same race, but they're coming together with others and learning from each other. And that's been really inspiring to see. So this is going to be our last question, and then I'll invite our panelists to offer any closing thoughts. So this is from an attendee who notes that their church in Charlotte is about to launch a 21-unit supportive housing facility in a formerly vacant building. At the same time, the congregation wrestles with being located on a site built by wealth accumulated by enslavers. The congregation is looking for ways to wrestle with reparations and integrate repair work into the opening of the housing facility. Do you all have any thoughts on lessons they might learn from similar endeavors you're aware of? Ending with an easy question. I will, well, while you all think.
Say, I would suggest, this is all I have. I don't have an example for, but talk about it. Put that out there. And then hear from the people in that community and what they think about it. But if you put it out there, be open to the fact that it may go the direction you weren't thinking. But I mean, there's always that risk. But if that's what your true impetus behind doing it is about, the repair may look very different from that community, because you never know how deep it goes. Community is a strange thing. People don't tend to move that far. Something as simple as that, you may be surprised if you open it up and someone has a grandmother who lived next door and they have some horrible story, and it just shifts the entire conversation. But I would say put it out there, but be open for what comes back.
Yeah, I love that. I would just add for myself that the supportive housing might not feel like the reparations that the community is desiring. So asking the community might, as you said, come up with different ideas that the congregation could pursue. So with that, I think any last thoughts on that one?
Oh, no, you asked for some suggestions, and I was just going to suggest two. I don't know if it'd be beneficial, but at least just going to look at some of the things that they did to address some of the things in their community. One is Evanston. I wanted to offer that. And then also a suggestion that was given to me was to look at OIC, Dr. Leon Sullivan, to look at what they did. So I just wanted to suggest those two.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Evanston has adopted a reparations program that provides funds for housing, or I think starting small businesses. Maybe it's just for housing for African-American residents of Evanston. And there's examples similar to that. That was kind of the first one out there. So yeah, great to bring that in. Thank you. So we're about we have enough time to sort of have any final thoughts. So to wrap us up, Greg, would you like to start?
Yeah, quick shout out to that question from Charlotte. That church, Caldwell Presbyterian, has been a leader in some good work around this city for a while. So quick shout out to them. I'm just gonna go back to close out with this idea of imagination. I think it's really key that faith groups don't. We have a unique role, but we don't have the only role. But we can reimagine the way that our cities have been constructed. We can tear down the highways that were the long legacy of urban renewal that we still see. We can reimagine those neighborhoods in ways that create some kind of wholeness. And so I think our regular and constant dissatisfaction with the way things are can open us up to a new imagination, and using the resources that faith has to help people see some alternatives and to risk the resources that we have to help in creating those.
Yes, thank you so much. Monique, any final thoughts?
Yeah, just briefly, I like that word reimagine. And as Greg was sharing that, I was thinking about that a lot of faith leaders have to reimagine how they actually do ministry, and look at ministry as more than providing a sermon on Sunday, because there are so many different areas that ministry can happen. And so I would just encourage faith leaders just to reimagine ministry, not looking at it how it has been traditionally done, because how it has been traditionally done has got us to where we are now. So just reimagine how ministry is done.
Yes, thank you. Kevin.
Yeah, I would encourage those who are working in faith community to personally engage what it is you want to see in community. In this sense, if you are an African American preacher, you ought to have some white preaching friends, or some Asian, other folks who aren't just like you, who read the book and come from a different place. Preston asked about how can churches put more pressure on politicians. Shameless plug, Preston. You get a copy of my book, Politically Preaching, available on Amazon.com. It'll help you. And then Derek asked about the follow-up for multi-ethnic. I would encourage him to take a look at the work that Howard Thurman did with his church in the late 60s and 70s in San Francisco. But particularly for those who want to engage authentically, expand your group of colleagues, the people that you engage, so that we're all biased. We're born that way. We're all fish swimming. So we see the things, and don't see the things that are around us. So open your mind up to engaging others, and walk in that prophetic witness.
Yes, thank you so much. This is so great. I'm really present to, the challenges faced in organizing through faith communities to address these really big issues and get us out of this, I love the water that we swim in metaphor, and also all of the amazing opportunities there are and the work that's already being done to do this and to move congregations from historical injustices towards, redress today and tomorrow. So thank you so much for your time. Kevin, Monique, Greg, thank you all for being here. And I'll turn it back over to Kashana to wrap us up.
Thank you so much, Leah, and thank you to all of our panelists for being here today. I was so excited for this conversation and was looking forward to learning. And I definitely have learned so much today, and I hope that all of our attendees have had that same experience. So thank you again for being here. Everyone at home, I hope that you will join me in silently thanking our moderator, Leah Rothstein, as well as our panelists, pastors Greg Jarrell, Monique French, and Kevin Slayton. Again, we very much appreciate you all sharing your expertise and your insights. I don't think that there's anyone who's leaving today without feeling, right, that they've learned something, and that's so critically important. Thank you to all of you for attending. If you haven't already spent some time checking out our website, please do visit redressmovement.org. And if you have not already signed up for our email list, please do so. You, right, and your engagement, your interest, and your willingness to do this work in your communities is absolutely critical to the success that we will have here at the Redress Movement, and your engagement and involvement is critical, right, to continuing to build, seed, and be successful in this movement for housing justice and for redress. I also want to offer my thanks to the tech team at the Redress Movement, to Sumner Bright and Grace Goober for making sure that we could pull this off, and making sure that if anything were to happen, we would be successful in hosting this event, because I certainly would not be able to ensure that that would be the case on my own. So thank y'all for everything that you do every day. On behalf of the staff and board of the Redress Movement, again, I thank you all for joining us today. I do ask that you continue to stay engaged, continue to stay up to date on what we're doing, and please be on the lookout for an email that will hit your inbox that includes some of the resources that we've discussed today. And of course, we will keep you up to date on when the next lessons from the field will be held. There should be one more before the end of 2024, and we look forward to seeing you all then as well. Thanks again. Thank you for being here. Take care.